The Sea Parts, the greatest escape in history, reveals a power that defies logic and divides nations. Would you believe it if you were there? The desert air vibrated with unforgiving heat, but it wasn't the sun that burned strongest in the hearts of the Israelites. It was fear. Forged after centuries of slavery under the iron fist of Egypt, the dread of Pharaoh and his chariots of war was etched into the soul of each one of them. Just a few weeks prior, the mighty hand of God had torn through Egypt with plagues that defied comprehension, forcing Pharaoh to release his people. Miracles so grand that made rivers run with blood and the sky grow dark now seemed distant, mere memories overshadowed by the imminent reality. Ahead, Moses, an 80-year-old man with a faith that moved mountains, guided the multitude. He was not a military strategist, nor an eloquent orator. He was a shepherd whom God had transformed into a liberator. And now, standing there, between the vastness of the impassable Red Sea waters and the dust rising on the horizon, announcing Pharaoh's relentless vengeance, even Moses' faith seemed to be tested. How many times we too find ourselves cornered between the impossible and the impending threat, feeling terror whisper in our ears that there is no way out. The cry of the Israelites echoed through the desert, a symphony of despair. "It would have been better to die in Egypt than to perish here in the desert," they shouted, their voices laden with resentment and panic. It was the human voice before the inexplicable, the logic of survival clashing with the divine promise. They had witnessed the wonders in Egypt, but now, with death knocking at the door, the memory of the miracles seemed to weaken before the cruel evidence. Would liberation be just a prelude to an even greater massacre? Moses, however, did not respond to panic with panic. His voice, though perhaps choked by the urgency of the situation, resonated with an authority that came from a place far beyond human logic. "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." Bold words, almost insane considering the scene before them. An unarmed crowd, crying children, trembling elders, and behind them the roar of the Egyptian horses growing closer. God's promise, which seemed so distant, needed an act of radical faith to manifest. That moment was not about human strategies, but about divine intervention that was about to rewrite the laws of nature. Hope, for the Israelites, was slowly dying under the scorching sun, as the dust of the Egyptian legions rose like a cloud of condemnation. But for Moses, faith was a beacon lit in the darkness, an unshakable certainty that God would fulfill what he had promised. The stage was set for the greatest display of power ever witnessed, an intervention that would separate not only a people from their oppressor, but also the waters of a sea, challenging everything humanity knew about limits and possibilities. The sun began to dip on the horizon, painting the desert sky with shades of orange and purple, as the terror of the Israelites intensified. The sound of Egyptian trumpets, the thunder of horse hooves, and the creak of chariot wheels were now distinctly audible, a terrifying soundtrack to the inevitable end that seemed certain. Pharaoh's soldiers, thirsting for revenge and humiliation, would spare no one. Women pressed their children to their chests, men clutched their few possessions, and resignation hung like a heavy shroud over the multitude. Would this be the end of the promise, the collapse of the liberation so hard won? Then a powerful voice echoed above the clamor. And panic, the voice of God to Moses. "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move forward." And with an even bolder command, "Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, so that the Israelites can go through on dry ground." Human logic would protest loudly. How could an old staff, a piece of wood, defy the immensity of a sea? Is it that true faith is not the absence of pain, but rather trusting even without understanding, acting when everything seems illogical? Moses, with the weight of a nation on his shoulders and the divine instruction in his heart, raised his staff. It was not the staff itself that held the power, but the obedience and unwavering faith of the man wielding it, channeling the majesty of the Creator. At that instant, the wind began to howl, not an ordinary wind, but a supernatural force, coming from the east, with an intensity that seemed to tear the very fabric of time and space. It was the breath of God, the same that had separated light from darkness at the beginning of time, now working to open a path where there was none. The waters, previously an impassable barrier, began to recede, not in gentle waves, but as if an invisible hand were pushing them, forming colossal and crystalline walls on each side. The seabed, usually hidden in dark depths, was now revealed, a dry and firm passage, illuminated by the light filtering through the liquid walls. Curiosity and awe replaced terror on the faces of the Israelites. That spectacle was the materialization of the unimaginable, a living testament to a power that governs creation itself. It was God's signature etched into nature, a reminder that for him, nothing is impossible. While the multitude hesitated for an instant, the Egyptian army continued to advance, torches flickering on the horizon, the certainty of victory stamped on their faces. But the passage was open. An entire nation with its animals and belongings began to cross the dry seabed, walking between the suspended walls of water, a path of hope forged in the heart of impossibility. That moment was not just an escape. It was the redefinition of freedom, the confirmation that God was with his people, even when darkness seemed to completely engulf them. The procession of the Israelites through the dry bed of the Red Sea was an image of faith in motion, an epic migration beneath the gravity-defying walls of water. The air was charged with palpable tension, a mixture of relief and terrifying expectation. On the other side, as the last Israelites still stepped onto dry land, Pharaoh's army, in its arrogance and fury, did not hesitate. Seeing the miraculously opened path, they interpreted it as an opportunity, a sign that their gods had, after all, granted them the advantage. The rumble of horses and the clang of weapons echoed against the water walls as the Egyptians plunged into the same path that had just saved their enemies. The pursuit was relentless. Chariots of war, cavalry, and an infantry thirsty for blood advanced, convinced that victory was within their grasp. But as they ventured deeper into the heart of the sea, something began to change. The wheels of Pharaoh's chariots began to jam, to get stuck in the mud of the seabed. Panic began to set in among the Egyptians. That path, which had seemed a promise of triumph, was becoming a deadly trap. "Let's flee from the Israelites," they cried to one another. "The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." The realization that they were facing a divine force, and not mere men, struck them like lightning. Moses, observing the drama unfold from the safe side of the opposite shore, received a new command: "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians, their chariots and their horsemen." Once again, the old shepherd, now the liberator of a nation, raised his staff, and the majestic walls of water, which for hours had remained suspended by an ineffable power, began to destabilize. With a deafening roar, the torrents rushed down, as if a colossal dam had broken. The sea swallowed the chariots, the horsemen, and Pharaoh's entire army. There were no prolonged screams, only the muffled sound of the waters closing over human arrogance. None of the pursuers survived. The one who had enslaved God's people, who had defied the Almighty, had his power and glory drowned in the depths of the same sea that had opened a path of hope. The scene was a dramatic reminder that divine justice, though it may tarry, always prevails. Faith is not overcome by death, and hope in God always finds a way, even in the deepest darkness. The story of the Red Sea is not just an account of an impressive miracle. It is an epic about freedom, providence, and the unwavering faithfulness of God. It reminds us that often, the greatest doors open in moments of greatest despair, and that waters that seem impassable can become paths of salvation. True faith is not the absence of obstacles, but the conviction that God is greater than any barrier, and that his promise of deliverance is as real as the parting and closing of the sea. The story of Moses and the Red Sea reminds us that faith is not overcome by death, and that hope in God always finds a way, even in the darkness. If you enjoyed this cinematic and reflective story, leave your comment below. Share this video with your friends and family. Give us a like to help us reach more people. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring narratives from the Bible.